Good day, students. It's class time. Watch lessons on Television Jamaica, TVJ's YouTube channel, or on One Spot Media. We also are live on gojamaica.com. If you have questions on today's subjects, send them to Television Jamaica's Facebook page at Television Jamaica or on Instagram at television_Jamaica, or use the hashtag TVJClassTime. I am Kayan Gordon, and I will be guiding you through CSEC POB. This week, we're going to be looking at management in business. Let's get started. Now, for our lesson today, we have a couple objectives that we're going to be attaining. And I want you to stay tuned because at the end of our lesson, we have some trivia questions, and I know that you'll be able to respond to them accurately. Let's look at our targets for today. So the first objective is that you must be able to define management. You must be able to also describe the functions of management, as well as the responsibilities that management has. At the end of our lesson, you should be able to define organizational charts, as well as outline the different types of charts. Construct a simple organizational chart, as well as interpret these charts. Now, let's get into it. Our first brainstorm for today is, do you know the roles of management in an organization? Think about it. Now, the first thing that we'll be looking at is our first objective, and it is, what is management? Now, I know that you're familiar with management because, even your principal at school is a manager, and some of your parents may be managers. You may know a manager, and you might have some sort of example or idea as to what is management and what does management do. So we're going to be looking at management in two concepts. The first is that management can be defined as the process of administering and controlling the affairs of the organization, running the business. And it may be the act of creating and monitoring such a business environment wherein the members of the organization can be cohesive, work together to achieve the vision and mission of the organization. And the second strategy, or the second definition of management that we'll be looking at today, is the fact that management can be defined as a group of people. The persons or individuals in an organization who are in charge of that organization. Now, management has some key functions. And if you think about it, what does a manager really do? What are the functions that managers play or management play within an organization? Let's look at a few of them. So the first function we'll be looking at today is planning. Managers or management plans. Management also engages in organizing, directing the operations of the organization, controlling, coordinating, delegating, and motivating. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 functions of the management within an organization that we will be taking a closer look at, starting with planning. Now, I know that you understand the reason for planning within an organization, and I know that if you're able to respond, you would say, well, planning, everybody has to really plan their way forward. We have to have an idea as to how we carry out tasks, or how an organization goes about achieving its objectives. So let's take a closer look at what planning involves. So the management of an organization must set objectives and determine the course of action for achieving those objectives. Planning involves short-term, medium, and long-term objectives for that organization. Now, in planning, it's important that there's an analysis of the company's position at a particular time. And one type of analysis that companies may do in planning the way forward is a SWOT analysis. And you will hear this if you do further study business beyond the CSEC level. The SWOT analysis is where management may assess the strengths of the organization, what are some of the good things about the organization that keeps it running. It may identify the weaknesses of the organization. What are some points for improvement within that organization, as well as the opportunities that are present that the organization can capitalize on. And the T of the SWOT analysis stands for the threats to the organization. And you would imagine that's one thing that the management has to plan for, to mitigate against threats, as well as to see how well they can prevent those from really affecting the organization. So planning is a key function that is played within organizations, and it comes from management. Management also organizes. When we talk about organization, in layman's term, we talk about sorting things and doing some arrangements. Now, organizing by management really looks at developing an organizational structure and ensuring that the right human resources as well as capital goods are secured and positioned in the right place to ensure that the objectives of the organization are realized. Organizing also looks at using an organization chart to present a graphical representation of the structure of that organization. Organizing also involves designing the individual jobs within the organization and ensuring that those jobs have the right people positioned to really complete the relevant tasks that are to be carried out within that organization. The third function is directing. And directing sounds like telling people to do tasks, right? Like if you give direction. Now, management also performs directing, and it's one of the key functions. Let's look at what it involves. So directing is instructing or guiding or supervising and influencing people to really enable or empower them, enable them to achieve organizational objectives. Directing really involves giving instructions to the different levels of management as well as other subordinates within the organization. And in giving direction, it is like any other function of management. Its end goal is really to achieve the objectives of the organization, the vision statement, the mission statement, the motto of the organization. And the directing of the operation may come at different levels of the management within the organization. Our next function is controlling. And, at this point, just to reiterate that even though these are the functions of management, in any establishment, some persons may object to how the establishment is being run, how management carries out its tasks or its functions, whether it is effective or not. But these are the functions of a manager or a management team within an organization, and controlling is one of them. We say controlling involves ensuring that performance does not deviate from standards, holding staff accountable, and ensuring that the staff performs according to the objectives that are stipulated. So controlling consists of 3 steps. It includes establishing performance standards. People within your organization, within any establishment, must know what are the standards of work, what are the standards that they must meet or try to exceed in their performance in the organization. And management is responsible for comparing the actual performance of those staff or capital goods in the establishment with the standards that have been set. And management may also take corrective action wherever necessary. So an act of controlling may be giving staff appraisals and assessing how staff is performing, as well as assessing how the equipment, in some cases where we have a capital intensive workforce, where we have more machinery in use, replacing manual labor, they may also assess how well these machinery are carrying out the expected task. Are they effective? Is there efficiency with the production process and so on? So management must really perform the task of controlling, assessing whether the performance standards are being met by labor or capital within the organization. Now, coordinating is another key function of management within the organization. And if you think about it, coordination involves ensuring that things work together. Moving parts are working together. So let's look at how management may coordinate. So we say that coordination is a function of management which ensures that the different departments and groups work in synchronization. So management coordinates with the goal of achieving unity of action among the employees, groups, and departments. And in coordinating, sometimes what management may do is to translate or to pass down the objectives of the organization or the way forward to the lower level managers, and in doing so, transfer that information to employees. So with coordinating, sometimes we have the different departments working together to accomplish a task. Let's look at an example of coordinating. So within the school, just using an example that you're familiar with, the manager, the principal, may encourage, let's say, the information technology department to work with the science department, with maybe a physics teacher, to actually accomplish a task. Maybe they work on a robotics project or a robotics program, and that's coordinating, ensuring that there is some correlation or working together of different parts or different teams within the organization. Now, we have delegating, another function of the management within the organization. And when we come back, we will start here or resume here. So we're going to pause right here and take a quick break. Stay with us.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Welcome back. Now, today we are discussing management in business in Principles of Business CSEC. And before the break, we discussed what is management. We also discussed the various definitions of management, whether it be management, the act, or management, the body or individual in charge. We also looked at a list of the different functions of management. We say that management is involved in planning, organizing, controlling, and I know you can list some of them. We have directing, and we're continuing at delegating. Now, your definition of delegation may be assigning tasks, and that is exactly what management is responsible for doing, or one function. So, when we look at delegating, it's sharing or transferring responsibilities from the superior or manager to the subordinates or employees. So a good manager is able to identify whether it is that they look at the previous work of the staff within the organization, or they examine their resume and see where each individual is best suited. And in assigning tasks, they may assign tasks based on the strengths of employees or the strengths of teams. So delegating involves identifying the strengths of the employees and assigning tasks based on their strong area or their areas of specialization. And in delegating, it also ensures that sometimes the work is divided. So in delegation, sometimes we have division of labor, sometimes we have specialization happening, but management delegates and assign duties, break down tasks into different parts and assign different tasks to different members within the organization based on their strengths and abilities that they've demonstrated. So delegating is one key function of management. Motivating is another key function. You know, when you are motivated as students, you are encouraged to give your best because you want a good grade. The motivation can be a little sweetie or some other ways in which you are commended for good work. And it's the same way motivation encourages people in establishments, in business. So motivating is a key role of management, and in doing so, it encourages staff to give of their best. It encourages staff to really perform at the peak of their potential, whether or not they are being directly supervised. So motivation is defined as energizing and directing and sustaining employees' efforts. You want people to be, when they wake up in the morning, they feel encouraged to get up and go to work, because it's a place where it's not a toxic work environment. People feel safe in their work environment, and they feel as if they are being rewarded. And there are different ways in which staff can be motivated. We talk about giving, it could be monetary incentive, it could be publicly recognizing good work, and people love to be praised, and encouragement sweetens labor. So motivation is a good way to get your staff, or to get staff within an organization to give of their best at their job. So motivation or motivating is a task that management may do to ensure that staff feel empowered. Effective managers have that ability to motivate those they work with to behave in a specific goal-directed way, and this will likely empower staff to work consistently whether or not the management is present, and motivation is good for staff morale. It really encourages people to even work together and create a type of synergy that is cohesive within the organization. Now, we're going to look at some responsibilities of management. So we're moving away from the functions that management play, and we're looking at what are their obligations with their leadership role. What are their obligations, and to whom are they obligated? So the management of an organization has an obligation to fulfill towards owners and shareholders, employees, society at large, customers, and government. Now let us look at the responsibility of management to each of these stakeholders of the business. And we're starting out with owners and the shareholders. Now, owners and shareholders are those risk takers, the entrepreneurs who invest their equity and they're looking forward to a return on their investment. And you may be questioning, well, we have owners and shareholders, aren't they managers? In some cases, we have people who own businesses and they employ management, those who have been trained and those who have the expertise, the years of experience in managing an establishment. Therefore, they may entrust the responsibility of management to someone else or to a team. So that team or that someone else, the manager or management, really has the responsibility to owners and shareholders to provide reliable feedback to these investors, because when they invest their money, they're looking forward to a return. So they're also looking forward to management providing them with accurate and reliable information about the performance of the business so that they can plan the way forward and know how to really deal with certain crisis in the business or certain performance in the business. So owners invest money in companies, and in return, management has the responsibility to increase the value of owners' investments through profitable operations. So it's an obligation that management has to really honor to report accurate information about the company's general performance and what is really foreseen to be happening in the future performance of the business. Management also has the responsibility to employees, and this is something that must be really taken serious, because the responsibility to employees, management is responsible for providing employees with a safe and healthy place to work. Employees want to know that when they show up at work, they're safe. It's a healthy environment. They're not exposed to anything that will be harmful to their health. Management must ensure that in carrying out their responsibilities to employees, that the environments are free from discrimination, whether it be colorism or a sexism, or it can be racism and sexual orientation, discrimination. So environments that are free from sexual harassment and all types of discrimination, that's one responsibility of management to its employees, to ensure that that environment is fostered within the business. Another responsibility to the employees is to provide appropriate wages and benefits for the employees, and not only to provide the appropriate wages and benefits, but to honor the contracts that have been signed to ensure that employees are actually taking home the pay that they have signed to, the pay that they have agreed to. So the appropriate wages and benefits are actually one thing that can actually motivate employees to know that they're getting the right amount of pay. And if it is that they have a promotion, they have an increase in their benefits, or whether or not they have any promotion. But in some cases where they might work on, and their pay is really based on, commission, based on how much work they put in, that their time is honored and it reflects in their wages that they're taking home. And other benefits too, like people look forward to their vacation time and so on, and it's the obligation of management to ensure that persons receive their due leave of absence from work, as long as it is credible. So responsibility to employees also include transferring successfully the goals and missions and visions of the organization. And this is a key role that management must play, because for any business to really function, we have to have a transferal of the goals, the mission, the final outcome of the production within the organization and the service delivery to really be successful. And in doing so, management must be able to translate or pass on to the employees the intended outcome or goals of the organization, so they can work towards achieving those goals together. Another responsibility, even though you might be thinking, well, people are showing up for work and conflicts is something that must be avoided. Yes, but it's just one of those things that happens in establishments, and that is just one responsibility that management has to take on. So one of its responsibility is to resolve conflicts as they arise within the organization and provide amicable resolution in conflicts. Management may also take on the responsibility of leading and motivating employees as one of its key functions mentioned. Now let us look at the responsibility to its customers. The customers are the reason businesses thrive, businesses grow. In addition to the employees, of course, who put in the effort and generate profit, but the customers are really where the revenue comes from. And the management has that responsibility to its customers to ensure that there is customer satisfaction. So the purpose of any business is to satisfy its customers, and management must develop some ethos or some culture that ensures that the following rights of the consumers are met. The first is that the products that they offer that comes out of that establishment, they're safe for the consumers. The right to be informed about products. So management must ensure that there is adequate information out there about their products. And I heard an advertisement about the fact that companies in Jamaica are really being encouraged to disclose information to the customers about their products and the ingredients that they have in their products, because that is one responsibility that they have to customers. Management has to really ensure that this is carried out. So the right to be informed, customers have the right to be informed about the products, about if the products are harmful, what are the possible effects of the products, and what the customers should do if it is that they have any side effects. It can also be in all the ingredients that are put into making those products. Another responsibility of management to customers is that they ensure that the right to choose is allowed or given to customers. And the right to be heard. Management must ensure that customers feel as if they are being heard. One of those things that some companies try to avoid is to upset customers. And that is the reason management ensures that those persons who are the face of the company are properly trained to really manage issues as they come in. Customers have a right to report if they have any issue with any products or service. And in ensuring that the right to be heard is really enforced, what management can do is to put a suggestion box. You may see some companies may do that. Management can also ensure that all issues at a certain scale come straight to management as it pertains to customers, because some customers are really key customers that are always returning clients to the business, and they are important to the bottom line of the business. The responsibility to government. the management is also responsible in ensuring that the organization is tax compliant. And this is a key point because, it is important that businesses that are established are tax compliant, and it comes from management and leadership of the establishment. Another responsibility that management has the government is to abide by the environmental regulations. So government may put in place laws that are to be abided by, and it's the management's duty to ensure that those regulations are really adhered to. Abiding by the labor laws, and this is one thing this is a key thing that happens worldwide. When we talk about management not necessarily abiding by the labor laws, abiding by labor laws meaning the provision of a proper and safe working environment, ensuring that people are not paid below the minimum wage, and ensuring that the environment that is created for employees are conducive and are according to the laws that are stipulated. Another responsibility is to avoid involvement in corruption, and it comes from the top. So management must ensure that it is abreast of the key happenings in the organization, and try to avoid the involvement of any form of corruption. And it is also the responsibility of management to government to disclose to the tax administration accurate financial data when filing taxes. And this is one thing that it must not be a practice that is enforced in organizations where there is an inaccuracy in the reporting of financial data, so that there is tax avoidance or reporting lesser returns or lesser income, so that the taxes you pay are less. It's not really supposed to happen. So one obligation that management has to the government is to ensure that there's accurate financial data being reported, and in doing so, ensuring that the right amount of taxes are being paid. Let us now look at the responsibility of management to society at large. Now, when we look at the responsibility of management to society, we talk about social responsibility and social welfare. Now, social responsibility, we can define it as the obligation or commitment of managers to take steps for protecting or improving the social welfare, along with protecting the interest of the company. Now, in carrying out its responsibility to society, managers can ensure that the company's products have limited or no negative externalities, and are environmentally safe. So we say negative externalities are spill-off from the production or consumption of goods and services. A negative externality can be just some basic examples. If I'm a producer of cigarette and we have consumers of cigarette, whether in the production process or the consumption process, if it is that the environment is being harmed, or if it is that we have people within the environment, their health has been compromised due to either the production process or the consumption process of cigarette, those are what we call negative externalities. It is a spill-off from the production process that that affects those who are not producers or consumers. You're basically bystanders in the production or consumption process. So that is one responsibility to society, ensuring that there is limited or no negative externalities. And usually companies are mandated as to how much carbon emission they can really produce, or they may be encouraged to find more environmentally friendly ways to produce, or to find better ways to really produce their goods, so as to ensure that their responsibilities their responsibility to society is really honored. Another responsibility is to engage the community, or they can engage the community within which the businesses are established. So management, this is one thing that management can do. And in doing so, they may do things like sponsor football or cricket games. They may sponsor back-to-school programs, or offer scholarships to people within the community where those businesses are established. So it's not necessarily that managers are obligated to provide these sponsorships to society, but it's an option that they can do to ensure that their clientele, the people within their community, are served in a particular way or recognized. They can sponsor programs such as healthcare and education, scholarship programs, or school technology programs. And this is a time at which you may see businesses actually trying to really carry out, management trying to really enforce its social responsibility. And here I have two pictures that you can see the Digital Foundation carrying out its social responsibility. It's and Carreras Limited offering scholarships. We have NCB doing that as well. And you have other examples around us that we can actually see businesses from its management carrying out its social responsibility. Now, an organizational chart is really one strategy that we can actually use to observe the structure of the organization, and from management all the way down, the reporting relationships. So you can look up additional information on organizational charts, and in another session, we can go back to our organizational charts. So today, we were able to look at the management in business. And in doing so, we were able to examine the definition of management, describe the functions of management, look at the responsibilities of management, we kind of just browse through what an organizational chart is, and the other objectives, we can look at them at another time. So that's it for CSEC POB. Up next, we have CSEC Geography. Please stay with us.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
that's the time we have.
It's here. Interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary, and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Good day, students. Welcome to class time. I am Clarine McFarlane, your CSEC geography teacher for this session. Today, we are going to look at environmental degradation. The objectives for today's lesson would include defining the term environmental degradation, explaining the ways in which various economic activities can contribute to environmental degradation, identifying degraded areas in Jamaica, suggests measures that can be taken to restore degraded areas. We will start by looking at the definition for environmental degradation. And just for context clue, degradation comes from the word to degrade. It simply means that some destruction is taking place. Degradation may be seen as a deterioration of the physical and biological conditions of the environment, depleting the natural resources or destroying the flora and the fauna, of course, which we can find on the natural landscape of the earth. A formal definition would include when the environment's ability to cope with its needs is reduced. Environmental degradation takes place when natural world suffers because of human activities. Some of the human activities that may lead to environmental degradation would include activities that are sectored in the 3 different categories which we would have looked at in the previous lessons when we looked at economic activities. These would include agriculture, mining, fishing, processing in manufacturing industries, as well as tertiary activities such as tourism. Looking on my screen is a concept map which states the source of natural resources, the economic activities that are involved in extracting these natural resources, and it can also include or look further at how these natural resources are used in different ways or for different purposes in our everyday lives. So let us look at the soil. From the soil, we engage in agriculture. The agricultural produce from the soil is then sent to manufacturing companies to be processed or to be changed from its natural state to be used elsewhere as a different or a new product. And we can look at the different examples as we see them, similar to how we have just outlined the crops of agriculture. Agriculture, in order to facilitate this form of activity, deforestation takes place. And deforestation, by definition, speaks to the cutting down of trees in order to use the land area. Last week, when we looked at agriculture, we looked at 2 forms of agriculture taking place. We looked at large-scale farming and we looked at small-scale farming. As it relates to large-scale farming, the trees are felled in order to accommodate plantations more so on coastal areas. Where small-scale farming is concerned, the land is cleared in order to accommodate the demands of food for the local population. So nowadays we hear of backyard farming. So persons will find more use for more land when they are building their houses or when they are looking for new places to live in order to engage in some sort of agricultural activities. When the trees are felled, or in the context of deforestation, then there are adverse effects on the environment. So we look at the fact that the absence of the trees would lead to soil erosion. Soil erosion refers to the wearing away of the Earth's surface by the agents of weather, such as rain, wind, and ice. So the movement of these materials along the surface. what happens when the trees are felled? The soil is left bare as we see it, being exposed to the elements of weather, sun, the rain. When the sun and the rain acts on the land, this exposed land becomes dry, and in its parched state, it degrades or it is moved. So the soil would have lost its fertility. In cases where the soil gets hardens, what we find happening when it rains, the soil will act as a thin or a smooth sheet, so the water will just flow over and lead into areas where that is not wanted in excess, which leads to flooding. Agriculture generates two types of pollution: pollution by organic waste and pollution by agrochemicals, such as our fertilizers or pesticides that are used on our farms. These types of pollution, they are more so prevalent, or they occur mostly in rural areas where you find a lot of farming activity taking place, where the soil is not suitable, but it is aided in production by fertilizing from point to point. It is also common in urban areas where we will have markets. So if we should go to the market centers in the nearby towns or cities, wherever we are located or whichever parishes we are from, you'll find that going to the market, you'll find a lot of garbage or debris left over from the market experience, or the scraps from the organic or from the lettuce, the tomato that is left, or the goods that is no longer wanted, that is dumped aside. That in itself is pollution. When we have deforestation taking place, the twigs and the rubbles or whatever is left on the bare soil or the bare surface of the ground, when it rains, it adds to the sediments that are sent to river systems. This leads to what is called siltation. So a lot more debris are found in the riverways, and it increases the carrying capacity, it decreases the carrying capacity of the river, which makes it heavier. The load is heavier to carry from one point to the other. And so those riverbanks now become overload, and they will spill over in unwanted areas, and again flooding will occur in areas that we don't want it to take place. This is also as a result of the fact that surface runoff will become rapid, or it will increase, simply because infiltration will become less. When infiltration becomes less, surface runoff increases. Infiltration is the capacity of water to soak through the soil into the underground system, into the watershed. Where we have large-scale farming, and one characteristic of large-scale farming, as we discussed last week, was that monoculture is prominent. Monoculture, where we plant only one crop on an entire area, over or usually up to 200 hectares of land. On this land, you find that the soil quality, the soil fertility is reduced, and as a result of that, the soil itself becomes loose. So loose soil is easily eroded, and that affects the production in that area. The removal of trees or deforestation, it affects the nutrient cycle, and not just the nutrient cycle, but it also affects the water cycle and the function of those cycles in how we operate as living beings in our environment. The decomposition of organic material returns nutrients to the soil. So we talk about the foliage. The foliage speaks to the leaf. The leaf that falls to the ground will decompose in order to add nutrients to the soil, or it replenishes the soil in such a way that it will increase the fertility, and so it increases the yield of the crops that we plant in our agricultural area. Now, if deforestation takes place, you will have far less leaves or foliage to be decomposed to add nutrients to the soil. So that ecosystem in which you will find these trees will also be disturbed and altered. The removal of trees greatly reduces the nutrient levels as there is less organic material to be broken down. As it relates to the nutrient levels, we can also speak to the trophic levels, or the stages at which nutrients is passed on within the ecosystem. So if we have no trees, more likely we'll find far less animals who would live in those trees or within the area where we find these trees. And the absence of these animals will find less feed or for other animals to feed on within that ecosystem. An ecosystem, by way of definition, is the relationship or a community in which we have both living and non-living things operating or being in the same space as they rely on each other. Heavy rainfall in areas where we have deforestation lead to leaching, or far more leaching is going to take place. So there's no holding capacity in the soil, and so that again affects the fertility of the area. The forest protects the soil in any given environment. So of course, if the soil is loose, it's going to accelerate the rate of soil erosion, as was previously mentioned. You'll find that the water table will retain far less water, seeing that surface runoff is going to be rapid, and you'll find far less plants growing in that area in its natural state, which in turn affects the amount of animals that will tend to live in these areas for survival as well. Speaking of the industries and how they contribute to environmental degradation, we talk about simply mining, we talk about drilling, we talk about quarrying. These activities have adverse effects on the environment in different ways. We speak of pollution in its three forms: pollution of the air, pollution of water, pollution of the land. Those are the three main types we'll focus on. So when you have mining, quarrying taking place in a particular area, or when you have secondary industrial activities taking place, it requires the construction of roadways and airstrips and possibly building of 1 and 2 shelters to accommodate persons who work in these areas, or possibly to build the site in itself. This in turn will require trees to be felled to accommodate such activities. So again, deforestation is another effect of industries being implemented in an area. Deforestation, it leads to this destruction of habitat. This is the place where natural or living things they will actually live. It displaces them, having them go elsewhere that are not suitable for them to live. And it also, well, that speaks to the displacement, and it also speaks to the lack of nutrients that they will need to survive in their natural state of living. Noise and visual pollution is another factor. And some of you who live in areas where we have bauxite plants may be suffering as a result of noise and visual pollution. We speak to noise pollution due to the fact that the heavy machines that are used in these areas, in order for them to operate, it produces a lot of noise, simply put. The noise that is produced is in excess of what we're able to tolerate, especially in built-up areas or areas where we have business taking place. Visual pollution, it may cause impaired vision. So we talk about the dust. We talk about smogging in these environments as well. The destruction of the landscape, meaning in areas where the land would be flat or where the road surfaces will be smooth now becomes rugged terrain that becomes not impossible but a little bit more difficult to traverse or to go through these areas. The landscape in itself may also become unstable where living is concerned. So persons who were living in areas where their house could withstand sun, rain, thunderstorm, whatever may come, as soon as industrial activities start to take place, then rocks become displaced, then landslide begin to occur, and things like those are likely to affect the environment. Remember, we are looking at the fact that these economic activities, they are affecting natural living of plants and animals alike. And of course, these are activities that are induced by humans. The irresponsible waste or the irresponsible disposal of solid and toxic waste is another effect of environmental degradation from the different industries. Solid waste we are speaking about are garbage. So of course, the garbage or the excess of what is not needed released from these factories and industries, they are let out into river systems, they are dumped in unwanted spaces. The toxic fumes from the factories, it affects our breathing, how our respiratory system operates, and this have adverse effect on us as humans as well. In terms of the aquatic and terrestrial creatures, in spaces where we have the let-off of these waste into the river system or into the sea, it will have adverse effect on ecosystems in the sea, such as the coral reef systems or the mangrove system as well. Landfills, they become a nuisance for some of us and also lead to other social activities. Seeing that these landfills have valuable resources that can be used, even though it is used not in a sense illegally, but in a state that it is not supposed to, or it is not safe to do so. So it may let off gases as an example, such as methane, which adds to the pollutants in the atmosphere. And pollutants in this sense are those substances that will trigger the pollution of any sort. And of course, the image on the left would have given you a visual representation of what we are talking about. So look at where the incineration plant is located. The fumes that is let out is let off in areas, or it moves, or the wind will drive this gas or these toxic fumes into areas where we have persons living or persons going about their daily lives. So of course, their respiratory system and functions are also altered. Let us take a look at Trinidad. Now, on the western coast of Trinidad, we have quite a number of manufacturing activities taking place. In areas where we see brown are areas where oil and gas are extracted. In these areas, wastes are released into the environment, into the natural environment. So separate and apart from these environments, you have deforestation taking place in order to accommodate the establishment of these institutions. The operation of these factories in their situation is also affecting our function as living things. As living beings, sorry. So we look at the fact that the waste from the petrochemicals that are produced, they have adverse effect on the environment, especially when they are displaced at sea. So look at the aquatic ecosystems that are being disturbed. Remember that key term, ecosystem, and what it means. How these are being affected. So let us look at the chain of nutrients and how we are affected again. 1. When the toxic wastes are released at sea, we find that the ecosystem, which has a lot of fishes or a variety of fish, will be affected. So the fishes will die due to eutrophication or the consumption of these toxic chemicals or the toxic materials. We as people, We rely on these fish in order to live because we need food to eat. Now, if we have less in that sector being produced, then our nutrient cycle will also be disturbed. Tourism and environmental degradation, and this one is a big one. Looking at tourism, in order to construct or to facilitate tourism business, a lot of deforestation will also have to take place. A lot of ecosystems will also be displaced. In that case, look at the destruction of the natural habitat for wildlife. So animals that will live in forest or in mangrove or wetland areas, they will have to seek refuge elsewhere. And wherever they find refuge will be in unwanted spaces or spaces that are not able to provide all that is needed for these wildlife to survive. We're not just talking about animals, but we're also talking about plants that may develop in these areas as well. This is a threat to their life. The mere fact that they are threatened, they are likely to die or become extinct over a period of time. Tourists oftentimes engage in different activities that are of threat to the natural environment. This would include snorkeling, deep sea fishing or reef fishing, and even walking on the corals. When we go to the beach, we want to go as far out on the reef to find out how far out we can go and stand to show off, of course. But that in itself is a destruction to the coral reef ecosystem. Because what will happen, the corals themselves will break apart. And so the function of that particular ecosystem will be disturbed. We'll look at the fact that the polyps of the coral reef ecosystem is what help to produce the white sandy beaches. The lack thereof will alter the environment, so tourists no longer want to come because the beaches are no longer clean, they are no longer white, or they cannot accommodate the activities of tourism activities. We look at the fact that ships that are carrying, or cruise ships that are carrying tourists, they may anchor into the coral reef ecosystem. They may also release their waste, as so hotels, to pollute the environment. This is of great disadvantage to us as humans as well as to the actual ecosystem. So cruise ships and hotels often take advantage of the fact that within the Caribbean, even though there are laws, the laws are not strictly followed on, or they are not adequate, they are not enough in order for sanctions to be applied, or sanctions for them to suffer greatly to put in place proper measures to protect the environment. Tourist development also destroy the natural ecosystem. Naturally attractive landscape become scarred by poorly planned and poorly designed development. So in areas where we have buildings being constructed to facilitate tourism-related activities, we find that proper drainage systems are not in place, and if there are, planning will not allow these systems to carry out for long periods of time, but only for the immediate time period. So a lot of flooding will occur in different areas due to the construction of these institutions or these buildings. So the takeaway, or the key points to note: as with environmental degradation, watershed, or when we degrade the natural environment, the watershed is being disturbed. And this is common where all the different economic activities are concerned. So when we mine, we are digging into the natural system, or into the natural water system, where the water is able to replenish itself naturally. If that is disturbed, can you think about the effects that it will have for us as human beings? We look at the fact that all three all three economic activities are associated with deforestation. We also look at the fact that deforestation is also leading to other multiple effects as well. One such is the displacement of wildlife, soil erosion, the fertility of the soil is reduced, and so forth. Deforestation will lead to adverse effects such as global warming, because the forest in place, it contributes to the absorption of CO2 or carbon dioxide. If trees are lacking, then you will have an excess of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which leads to global warming. Carbon dioxide is one such greenhouse gas, that makes the environment a lot more warmer than it should be. So these are some of the activities that we will engage in to lead to or require deforestation, the need for agriculture, especially for large-scale farming or for cattle ranching, where land is needed for grazing. You look at the construction of areas that are needed for construction of roads and highways, not just roads and highways, but for urban development as well. We look at forest fires. So one way in which we will engage in deforestation or removing the entire layer of the forest is lighting the environment or lighting the forest so that we can get some of the nutrients up from the ashes in the long-term effect. But that in itself is hazardous to the environment. The use of fuel from lumbering, clearing forest floor from mining. Now, let us look at some of the effects specific to carbon dioxide. So 20% of the carbon dioxide that is released in the atmosphere is as a result of forest degradation or the depletion of forest resource. Where we look at the global transport sector, that alone is contributing 13% and more carbon dioxide to the environment. Well, if we should consider other economic activities, or if we should consider the exhaust from these industries, can you imagine how much more CO2 will be released in the atmosphere and how much hotter the environment is going to be in a couple of years due to human activities? Think about it. In looking at the degraded areas in Jamaica, we're first going to look at the forest areas. So the areas that are highlighted dark green on the map are areas that are highlighting the cockpit country, especially, or that covers majority or most of Trelawney. You can also find the cockpit country in parts of St. James, a small portion of St. Anne and St. Elizabeth, which is represented here. We also have the natural forest being represented of the Blue Mountain in the east. So these are currently primary forested areas that are in their natural state. If you look around those areas that are blotted dark green, we have faded green around those areas. Those are natural areas or natural forests that would have been removed in order to accommodate different human activities. We speak of construction, we speak of tourism-related activities, agriculture, especially along the coastal area, and so forth. Let us look at bauxite. Notice the location of bauxite companies or bauxite deposits where they are found in relation to forested areas. Some amount of deforestation needs to take place. We look at the let-off of toxic waste into the air, into the atmosphere, as well as the release of solid waste on the land, as well as in our different waterways. And all of this has to take place in order to facilitate both production and the transportation of the produce from these plants. We look at the degraded areas in terms of the watershed. Now, on my map is showing us the main watershed areas of the different river systems that are located in Jamaica. And if we should look at the map that shows the degraded forest that was highlighted before, we see some relationship between the two. There's one thing or a rule of thumb. Usually, rivers start at high point in mountain tops. So just imagine where these watershed areas are degraded or they are being disturbed, then eventually our water sources or our water systems are also being destroyed or being altered. In order to reduce degradation in our environment, we look at sustainable management practices. And these would include education. We need to educate our people in terms of what are some of the things that we can do to preserve our environment, as well as looking at alternative ways of protecting the natural environment. We speak of organic farming practices. Last week we mentioned a few. This would include crop rotation, mulching, in order to retain the nutrients of the soil, as well as reducing the need for deforestation. Forest and soil conservation will speak to activities such as afforestation, which is developing new forests in new areas, reforestation, planting back trees where forest flora would have been disturbed. We may also look at terracing as another factor, planting along the contour as another soil conservation technique, fishery management, avoid overfishing, as well as observing the different time periods for fishing for certain species of fishes that we need. We look at ecotourism. When we looked at tourism as an activity, we look at the fact that persons are going in to observe the natural environment and become one with nature while they are enjoying their experience in a new environment. Another practice that must be considered would be improved mining and manufacturing techniques. So we talk about spot-on mining, where they will mine only at the point that they will extract the resources, and we will also look at new and improved methods that will eliminate the need for degradation. So having gathered all of that, let us look at a few trivia questions to see how much you have remembered. So the first one, which of the following are soil conservation methods that would be best able to restore a mountain region severely eroded due to deforestation? Is it A, reforestation and crop rotation, B, reforestation and contour plowing, C, strip cropping and crop rotation, or is it D, agroforestry and strip cropping? So I'm sure all of these terms are familiar with you. Which two will restore a mountainous region that is severely eroded by deforestation? All right. And if you would have guessed reforestation and contour plowing, then your response would have been correct. Reforestation speaks to putting in place or replacing forests that would have been removed from a particular location. Contour plowing is conserving the soil where we are planting along the contours of the mountain or the hillside. Trivia question 2. Deforestation is the cause of uncontrolled forest fires, increased rainfall, the decline in water supplies, soil erosion, sedimentation, and flooding. Which of these would be your best answer? If you have guessed A, then your answer would be correct. So uncontrolled fires, of course, would lead to deforestation, and not just deforestation, but more effects or leading effects from deforestation. So we look at the displacement of wildlife, look at the fact that nutrients will be lost in that particular environment. We also will look at the fact that our own supply of food will also be reduced. And our third and final trivia question: which of the following soil conservation methods involves cutting level, step-like areas into the hillside? A, contour plowing; B, terracing; C, strip cropping; or D, crop rotation? Which of the following soil conservation methods would include cutting level step-like areas into the hillside? And if your answer is terracing, yes, you are correct. And that takes us to the end of today's lesson. Looked at 1, what is deforestation? 2, we looked at the different activities that will lead to environmental degradation. We looked at the degraded areas in Jamaica, and we also looked at the different things or the sustainable management practices that we can engage in to avoid environmental degradation. That's the time we have for CXC Geography. Up next is Cape Biology.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
the Welcome back to class time. It's now time for Cape Biology. I am your teacher, Joanna George Johnson, and today's lesson will be on respiration. All right, let's begin. So we have here respiration. Most of you would be familiar with respiration already because you would have done it at CSEC level. But however, you know, just like with photosynthesis, it would be very simple at the CSEC level. At the CAPE level, we go into a lot more detail. The whole biochemical process of it is what we will be looking at today. So these are our objectives for today. I forgot to include, however, that we will also be looking at the structure of the mitochondria as well, near to the end, okay? So let's get to it. Now, lots of the time, the respiration has a lot of misconception, so I need to throw some of these things out from now, before we even get into it. Because a lot of times we ask students about respiration, they think it only occurs in animal cells. Of course it doesn't. It occurs in all cells. Animal or plants, bacteria, any type of living organism must undergo respiration. Sometimes students think it's related to breathing. Well, somewhat. But remember, I just said to you that all cells undergo respiration, but not all organisms respire. So that would mean that there are some organisms that need to respire, clearly, and they are not breathing. So it is not totally related to breathing, but in humans it sort of is. We'll explain that later. Respiration really is the release of energy from our food, or whatever nutrients we take in, mainly our carbohydrates, all right? And it is a release of energy in the form of ATP, all right? And so therefore, we need to recognize the main impact or the main purpose of respiration is about ATP. Next thing is that it occurs in the mitochondria of cells. And usually I say animal cells. Most children tend to think this. Now class. First things first, I know you're going to say, oh, but miss, everybody tell me already that the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cell. And it is. It is. However, first of all, it starts in the cytoplasm. All respiration starts in the cytoplasm. And the main reason for that, if you remember from Unit 1 days, that different cells, there are different types of cells that exist in nature. And some of these cells don't have large cellular organelles, internal cellular organelles, such as a mitochondria. So if all cells respire and not all cells have mitochondria, so therefore how it is that respiration must occur in the mitochondria? No, it doesn't. It actually starts out in the cytosol. Sometimes you say cytoplasm, but if oxygen is around and the organism has the capacity to, then it will continue in the mitochondria. And yes, there is mitochondria in plant cells as well. Sometimes students tend to mess that one up as well. And also there are times when students think that if it occurs in plant cells, it only occurs at night. No, it occurs all the time. Remember I said to you that the point of respiration is to produce ATP. And the problem is with ATP is that ATP cannot be stored by the body or by the cells, and so therefore there needs to be a constant replenishment of ATP in the cell. And so therefore, if we were to stop respiring right now, you would not have been able to hear the end of this sentence because you would have run out of ATP, and because of that, you would not be alive. The importance of ATP. First, it fuels all metabolic or all chemical reactions that occurs in the body or in the cells. All right? So it's called the energy currency for all living cells. Whether you are a bacterial cell, or a cell in a mango tree or a breadfruit tree, or a cell in a cat, a frog, a dog, a cat, or us, still ATP that is being used as the energy currency. It allows for the movement of all living cells. For example, from the wiggly of the sperm cell up the fallopian tube to us doing the newest dance move, all of that requires ATP. And so therefore, you see how important it becomes to all living cells. It also allows for the active transport in cells, as you should be aware of. Now, typically, oh dear me. Typically, anyway, let's move on. The respiration in our cells tend to come in several steps. Typically in grade 11 or grade 10, when you would have learned respiration first, what would have happened is that you would have learned an equation, which hopefully I can remember, where it starts out with glucose, okay, plus oxygen going to give you CO2 plus water. And we know ATP is given off. Now, this looks like a very simple equation, but you have to remember something, that if you look closely, those of you who do chemistry especially, you will recognize that this equation is actually a combustion reaction. And those of you who don't know what combustion is, that is a reaction that causes a fire to take place. Clearly, our cells don't have fire going on each time. So this equation doesn't really happen in our cells because then we would not survive it. So what happens is that the process of respiration happens in increments so that all of the energy is not released at once as in a combustion reaction. Instead, what happens is it is released at different stages. And over here we see where we have several stages of what we call aerobic respiration. This is the respiration that occurs in organisms that have a mitochondria and that oxygen is readily available. All right? So we are going to be looking at the different stages, but today we are only going to be focusing on glycolysis mainly because it is a long process and it's the process that occurs in all living cells, whether or not you have a mitochondria. The reason for this is because glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm, and it also takes place in all living cells. bacterial cells, eukaryotic cells, prokaryotic cells, all living cells will undergo the process of glycolysis. Okay? So let us move on. I'm going to start that whole thing now. Now, the word glycolysis literally means splitting sugar or sugar splitting. Glyco speaks to sugar and lysis means to split, so it's called sugar splitting. All right? It is an enzyme controlled process, as you know, as we spoke about earlier, that the process of respiration, aerobic respiration, that is respiration that uses oxygen, actually is about combustion. And because we cannot have fire going off intermittently in our cells, because that will be spell disaster, what happens instead is that enzymes are used to control the process. So this particular process is very important, and so therefore you find lots of enzymes are involved. Luckily, you do not have to learn all of the names of each of the enzymes, and so that's great for you guys, okay? Back in the day, we had to. It occurs in 4 major steps, so we will be discussing each of these 4 major steps, and we are going to talk about the final products of respiration or glycolysis, and we'll talk about the overall yield. So we are basically, this is the summary before we even start. So let's get to it at the first step of glycolysis. So the first step is called the activation phase of the glucose. Now it's also the energy investment stage. A lot of books will tell you it's called the energy investment stage, mainly because even though respiration is about the making of ATP, pretty much, it also involves, at the start of it, the investing of actually 2 ATP molecules to the process. Okay? So you know you have the old saying, you have to spend money to make money. So this is the money being spent, the ATP molecule being broken down to form ADP twice during the first stage of glycolysis. It entails the addition of a phosphate group to the glucose molecule. Now, what you notice that it's the phosphate group is added to the glucose. Remember, glucose is a 6-carbon compound. It's very important that when you're dealing with organic type of processes, especially when it's not a one-step type of reaction, but it's a process, you need to always remember and focus on how the number of carbons are going. Very important. So therefore, first of all, you have the phosphate group being added to the glucose to make glucose 6-phosphate. And then there's some isomerization that goes on to convert the glucose into fructose 6-phosphate. And then a next addition of the ATP, again, calls fructose 1,6-diphosphate. So there are 2 phosphate groups attached at either end of the glucose molecule. Please note that some books will say fructose 1,6-biphosphate and some books will say fructose 1,6-diphosphate. Don't get confused. You know, people just say things differently. Now, the reason for this stage, the importance of this stage is that glucose on its own is pretty reactive. However, the addition of these phosphate groups to it actually makes it more reactive. So it's more readily broken down. It'll be ready for action during this whole process. That's one reason. The second reason, because this is occurring in the cytoplasm, as we know, the glucose molecule is one that can easily pass through into through the cell membrane of the cell and leaves the cell at will by diffusion. But addition of these fructose to these phosphate groups to the glucose actually prevents it from going through the cell membrane. Okay, so those are the 2 main reasons. But I think for respiration purposes, the main reason is that it activates the glucose. Since I call it the activation stage of glucose. All right. Now the next part we are looking at is the splitting of the hexose into the hexose biphosphate. I said hexose, hex means 6. So remember it's a 6 carbon sugar, and you have our first breaking of bonds. Now I want you to think about this. Each time a bond is broken in your original glucose, you are looking at the release, the possible release of energy each time. So there is one split down the middle, and when that split occurs, you are making glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. I'm sure you remember that from photosynthesis. That's the first carbohydrate made by photosynthesis in Calvin's cycle. And so here we have it coming back in respiration. So it is made, just to let you know, you will see in your books as well that this other substance, dihydroxyacetone, is also made, but it's not used in the process of respiration. It does not continue along in that for the process of glycolysis. So it is easily converted by a next enzyme to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So eventually, both molecules will become glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Again, as you can see, the phosphate groups are still attached, one on each molecule, because it's just split in the middle. So just all we have is a splitting of the glucose molecule, so you end up with 2 of them. Please remember to keep the carbon numbers in line. Just you need to remember that. Now the third step is about the dehydrogenation of the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Dehydrogenation, if you remember, is to remove hydrogen. And also, if you remember clearly from photosynthesis, I also said to you that anytime a substance is, a hydrogen is being removed from a substance, it's being oxidized. And then anytime it accepts hydrogen, it is being reduced. So what happens here when dehydrogenation takes place, what happens is this substance, NAD, now it looks like the one we use in photosynthesis called NADP+, but no, the P is not there. For respiration, it's NAD, and NAD+ accepts the 2 hydrogens that's coming off of the phosphoglyceric acid, and that is basically, okay, the phosphoglyceric acid. And so what happens is that the NAD becomes reduced and each of the original phosphoglyceric acids will be reduced and lose some hydrogens, and that will go to NADH. Now, NADH, just like the NADPH of photosynthesis, has a similar situation in that later on it will become important for the whole process of respiration. Now, during this whole process of the dehydrogenation, what happens here is that ATP is also is produced. So 2 of them is produced per phosphoglyceric acid or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. But remember, there were 2 of them originally. So at the end of respiration, or glycolysis, that is, you end up with 4 ATPs being made. Now, these 4 ATPs that are being made is not, obviously, you would not call that the total yield of glycolysis, because at the end of glycolysis, pyruvate is made, and I'll explain why this is saying pyruvate and this one here is saying pyruvic acid. I'll explain that shortly. But what I want you to grasp is the fact that the ATPs, even though there are 4 of them in total that is made, you have to remember at the start of the process, we had invested 2 ATP at the start. So therefore, even though 4 is being made at the end, we still call it a net yield of 2 ATP molecules, okay? Because you invested 2 at the start, so even though you make 4, the 2 of them is counted as well. That was your investment in the first place.
Now, there's a series of reactions that takes place between the phosphoglycerate that was made before to the pyruvic acid that is made at the end, but we do not have to go through each individual step. What you need to get is that the fact that the ATPs that are being made, the making or the reduction of NAD plus to make reduced NAD, and also the fact that pyruvate is made. And you remember it's a 3-carbon compound, 1, 2, 3 carbons that is here, which tells us that there are 2 of them that will be made per glucose molecule that started the reaction in the first place. Now, just to let you know, in some books you're going to see pyruvate, and in some books you're going to see pyruvic acid. Now, pyruvic acid is really what is made at the end. However, IRL, you find that because there's a water environment that all reaction goes on in, there's always ionization of an acid in water. And so the anion of the pyruvic acid is pyruvate. All right? So there are several intermediate steps that takes place before you reach to the end of glycolysis. And notice, so far, no oxygen is required for this stage. And that is the reason this stage deals with what is called anaerobic respiration, which is respiration that occurs without the use of oxygen. But as you can see, the max total yield of anaerobic respiration is only 2 ATP molecules. Clearly, that would not have been enough to sustain life for larger organisms. Small, like bacteria and so on, they might be able to handle like a 2 ATP per glucose molecule, but not big organisms like our cells and trees and so on. Okay? So we'll talk more about it later. Just an overview of what we were speaking about earlier of glycolysis here. The investment of the 2 ATP at the start, the splitting of the glucose or the fructose phosphate molecule, and the making of the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, as you know, and then after several reactions, the making of pyruvate. And just to let you know is that during that whole process here, that reduced NAD is made, and there are 2 of them, 1 per molecule of the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and there's also 2 ATP per molecule, which give you a total of 4 molecules. And so far, as you can see, only what has happened to glucose, it has been broken into 2. That's it, just broken into 2. And the yield, as we went through already, because they ask this on exams all the time, so there's no way of getting away from not knowing this, is that you end up with 4 ATPs in total. However, it's a 2 ATP net, very important. 2 NAD is formed, or reduced NAD. I like to use the word reduced NAD as a purist in terms of chemistry. And 2 pyruvate molecules are formed. Please note, they are both 3-carbon compounds, so we have not lost any carbons yet, so there's no CO2 being produced or anything like that just yet. All right? So the number of carbons we started with is 6. Number of carbons we have ended with is still 6. And the number of carbon-carbon bonds that have been broken is 1. And so far we have only yielded a net of 2 ATP molecules. All right? Now, the next step after glycolysis happens, if there is no oxygen, the process goes into going into what's called anaerobic respiration. Now, the purpose of this process is so that the NAD, the reduced NAD that we spoke about earlier, that was made in glycolysis, can be regenerated or be oxidized to become NAD+, so that it can be fed back into the whole system of glycolysis in the earlier stage. So what happens, depending on the cell, if it's lactobacillus cell, you have what's called two types of anaerobic respiration, main types. There are others, but we don't really talk much about them. The two main types are lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation is what occurs in our muscle cells, skeletal muscles, okay, only in our muscle cells, and that is only for a very short period, and it produces lactic acid. Now, lactic acid is also a 3-carbon compound, so there's no CO2 that is produced during lactic acid fermentation from the pyruvate. In alcohol fermentation, what is made is, it usually occurs in like yeast and other microorganisms. What is made is, the alcohol that's made is called ethanol, which a lot of people are familiar with, and a lot of industries has made a lot of money on alcoholic fermentation. And it also, because ethanol is a 2-carbon compound, carbon dioxide is also produced, and hence the baking industry, because of that fact, makes a lot of money again using that whole premise of alcohol fermentation, because the CO2 is released during that fermentation and causes our buns and bread and so on to rise. Okay, so that is the whole thing about alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, which all has to do with anaerobic respiration. This is respiration without the use of oxygen. And I'd just like to let you know that during the process, after pyruvate is made, the ethanol that is produced or the lactic acid that is produced does not yield any more ATP. So all of the ATP that has been made from this respiration occurs during glycolysis. All right? So now we need to go to the next stage, because what happens is that if there is oxygen, then aerobic respiration will take place, and this occurs in the mitochondria. All right? And so it's important that we know what the mitochondria looks like. So it is less complicated looking than the chloroplast did, but it's about the similar size, can be about the similar size to the chloroplast. It also has a double membrane, as you can see here, 2 membranes. It also is like the chloroplast, that is. However, the inner membrane is folded in, heavily folded. And that heavy folding is called a cristae. For the mitochondria. The mitochondria also has its own ribosomes and DNA. Anytime you see that in an organelle, ribosomes, DNA, those are protein-making mechanism already. So you know that the mitochondria is making its own protein, usually the enzymes that are involved in the whole process of respiration. Okay? So in the exam, this is what you see, the black and white diagram. So I thought it would be a good idea to say, you know what, instead of showing the nice fancy 3D ones that you might like to see and it's easier to recognize things, let's show you the one that you'll see on the exam paper. Because a lot of time when students see these things, they're totally bewildered in the exam, and it's important that you familiarize yourself with what it looks like before you go into the exam. And also to learn to ignore some of you see these black splotches and stuff. These are just what we call artifacts in the science, in the biology world, when we look at microscopy, because what happens in the preparation of the slides, sometimes things ends up in there, and as the scientists, you need to know when it's just foolishness and when it's actual part of the structure that you're looking at. So you need to be able to identify the cristae, the enfolding membrane of the internal part of the mitochondria. So these lines you see here, cristae. Then you need to know the matrix, which is the dead center, the inside part of the mitochondria. So you need to know where those are. Okay, you need to be able to recognize the intermembrane space and the inner membrane versus the outer membrane. Also, we need to know where things happen. the matrix, which is the inside part or the middle part of the mitochondria. That's where we have the link reaction and Krebs cycle, which we'll discuss in a future class. And also in the cristae, the inner foldings, the membranes that are folded inwards, this is where what's called the electron transport chain occurs. All right, class? So we are going to just now look at some questions to help us see what we have remembered so far, and so that we can move on in the near future. All right, I wanted to say something to you about, in the drawings of the mitochondria, please note that in the fancy 3D diagram, you would have been able to recognize DNA and ribosomes and all of that. In this, you're not going to be able to see those things because there's so much inclusions in this black and white diagram that sometimes children mistakenly label things that are not really there. They're just, artifacts or things that you happen to see. So be careful about that when you're doing an exam. All right? So, as I said, we're going to go through our first question. First question is, why is the phosphorylation of the glucose at the start of glycolysis necessary? You should remember that we spoke about it. It prevents the glucose from diffusing out of the cell, and it also energizes the sugar, so make it more unstable and therefore more reactive. Okay? Next, explain the importance of glycolysis taking place in the cytoplasm of all cells. Well, think about it. If all cells have a cytoplasm, all cells don't have a mitochondria. So the mere fact it occurs in the cytoplasm, it means that all cells can respire, both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells as well. Okay? The last question we have is, what is the fate of the products of glycolysis? Now, we didn't discuss that directly, so we can discuss it now. The ATP, as you know, will be used for energy-rich activities and reactions that occurs in the cell and in the entire organism as a whole. The NADH, or the reduced NAD, which I like to call it, is going to be taken now to the mitochondria, to the inner part of the mitochondria, to the electron transport chain to release even more ATP. So you see that NAD that you see that has been made, it has use for future ATP. But in the anaerobic section with alcohol and lactic acid fermentation, that was not utilized. The whole fact of using the NAD or the reduced NAD to make more ATP, that was not utilized. Okay? So that's why the aerobic respiration is so important. Pyruvate. The pyruvate that is made, if there is no oxygen, then lactate or alcohol fermentation will take place. However, if there is oxygen, it will then be broken down even further. In future classes, we'll talk about that, where we'll look at Krebs cycle. We'll first look at the link reaction, then we will look at Krebs cycle, and then we will look at the other stage of aerobic respiration, which is the electron transport chain to release more ATP because of the production of reduced NAD. So we are basically coming to an end to what we were talking about today. I just want to remind persons to join the Google Classroom online. I know some of you have already done so, and I promise you that I know I have been, delinquent in answering some of the questions you have been asking, because there's quite a few. However, I promise you I will take the time to do so because you show the interest, so I will make that time to help you out with that. And even if you have more questions, even on this topic or other topics, feel free to ask them. I hope that the whole process of respiration is something that you are going to learn well, because it is a part of the exams, the syllabus, that comes every year on the exam. That module 1 on photosynthesis and respiration, I can assure you, will come. either a structured question or an essay, long essay worth 13 points or so on. And please learn to relate the whole topic of respiration with photosynthesis. That's the next thing, the key thing. You need to be able to relate the two things together, because what happens is, if you notice at the start of respiration, glucose starts respiration, but at the end of photosynthesis, glucose is what ends it. So you can see one is the reverse of the other. So it's extremely important, class, that we do this, all right? So this is all the time we have for Cape Biology. You can watch today's lesson again on onespotmedia.com and on JNN between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Class time resumes tomorrow at 9:45 a.m. right here on TVJ. Until then, keep safe.